And now going into our last segment here, Xan and I each have a couple of these betting plays that we really like that we think really stand out to us. And these are plays that either we would we have already wagered our own money on, or we would certainly wager our own money on. I know I have for mine. So we're going to go through and discuss our favorite plays from the SEC win totals here. So Xan, I'll let you go first. Who is one of your favorite plays from the SEC?
So I have two plays, and we'll do them one at a time here. I'll do one. I'll throw it right back to you and see if you're in agreement. My first play, and I think the safest play, is the Alabama over. And this is because of everything that we have recently discussed. That you have Bryce Young returning, who's going to be the first or second pick in this upcoming draft. He's an absolute elite player. We have Will Anderson returning, who's probably the best pass rusher in all of college football, and he's only a true sophomore. You have an elite offensive line over there at Alabama. They've got 3 to 4 guys who are going to go in the first 90 to 100 picks. And then you've got key transfers, Jahmyr Gibbs, Elias Ricks, and then an extremely experienced defense of juniors and seniors who are slating in despite all the talent that they lost. So Alabama is just absolutely slated to win 12, if not at least the 11 games. So we're talking about if you put your money on Alabama and they lose a game, your money is still safe. I don't see Alabama losing more than a game. So I think that is a good bet. You either win or you get your money back. I think it's the safest bet that you can take in the entire SEC.
I completely agree. I actually really thought about picking this one, but I didn't. But I did actually hammer this as soon as I saw the lines come out. I put $15 on the Alabama over here. And like you said, it's push insurance. I think 99% likely you either get your money back or you hit it. And I think Alabama's going to be a very good team. I like this over as well. And you don't really see this very often where a team is pegged at 11 wins even, and we're just saying this is an easy over. This is going to be, a lock, when especially you have a team in the toughest division in college football. It's just a testament to how good Alabama is going to be next year. I think the only thing that could derail this over is a Bryce Young injury. If not, this team I think is an easy lock to get 11 wins. So I like that as well. So my first pick here, I already kind of alluded to it. I'm going in the same state here. I'm going down south to Auburn. This Auburn under to me is one of my favorite plays in all of college football. And if you watched our previous video, you heard earlier in the podcast, I just really am not too high on what's going on with Brian Harsin there. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think this just has a chance to spiral out of control, especially if the Auburn boosters start ringing the bells and call for Brian Harsin's head. If he gets fired midseason, this under is going to hit. And I just think that this team it's a quit factor alert for me. That's one thing that I really look for when I bet on unders, especially, is I look for teams with coaches that are on the hot seat, and quit factor alert is blinking with shining lights here for Auburn. One thing that I didn't really mention last year, or one thing that I didn't mention earlier about Auburn, is that I do like how they do return their sack leader on the defensive side of the ball in Derek Hall. But I just think they take a step back without Derek Mason at defensive coordinator. And if you look at their schedule, the first half of their schedule, I think, is very winnable. Believe it or not, I think that Auburn probably can get to maybe 5 wins at the max in the first half of their schedule. They play against Penn State at home, which I think is a 50-50 game. They get Missouri at home as well early on. So I think the best case scenario for Auburn is that they get 4, maybe 5 wins out of this first stretch of games here. But you look at the second half, that back half of their schedule is absolutely brutal. And if Auburn doesn't get off to a hot start early on in the season, I think Harsin could be fired somewhere around October, November. And if that happens, it's going to go downhill fast. And I think that if this team just gives up, they're at risk of losing to UAB. I think UAB is a really good G5 program. And if they get caught napping against UAB the week before the Iron Bowl, I think they could lose to them as well. So for all those reasons, I am hammering this Auburn under. I played it at 6.5, and I also played it at 6 even. So that's my very favorite. That's my first pick for the SEC here.
I definitely agree with you on the Auburn under. I mean, when you look at the quarterback situation as well, it's TJ Finley or Zach Calzada. Neither one is a proven commodity, and it just doesn't seem like they have a good system going over there in Auburn. When you go back to the Harsin, what you're talking about with Harsin, think about Derek Mason, how Derek Mason left to go to Oklahoma State to take less money to play at a program that you typically would be able to poach from as well. That speaks volumes about the dysfunction that's going on at Auburn. So for me, yes, absolutely. They have dysfunction in their system. And then as far as a talent perspective, the lead man at the quarterback, there's just so many question marks. And even the number one guy out of those two guys has not proven to be play an elite level by any stretch of the imagination. So definitely Auburn on the under seems like a safe hit.
And if you look at the roster, it's really not that bad of a roster. Like it's still a decent roster, but you just have to factor in all this off the field stuff that's going on and the quit factor, especially defensively. They got a lot of good players, but to me, it would be a very, very impressive coaching job if Brian Harsin gets north of 6 wins, in my opinion. I think that if he gets this Auburn team to 7 wins or more, that's just the tip of the cap. I'll take the loss. I'll take the L there. But I think the under here is a very good play. Now for your second play here, what is your second favorite play for these SEC win totals?
My second favorite play, and I know a lot of SEC homers are not going to appreciate this one just because of recency bias, but I like Tennessee on the over 7.5. When you look at returning production, I mean, you've got Hendon Hooker, who had 31 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 2,900 passing yards. In addition to him being a dual threat, that is absolutely elite. He's set up in a great situation over there with Heupel, and they have a returning 1,000-yard pass catcher in Cedric Tillman. I think it's going to be an absolutely outstanding matchup for them. They also have a lot of returning production on their defensive side of the ball. Everyone is basically a junior or a senior that is slated to start or projected to start. They also have a transfer in Brew McCoy. Now, he's a big question mark, but no doubt he was a 5-star recruit, one of the top in his class a few years ago. Despite all his inconsistencies in transferring, he can obviously play. So it'll be interesting to see if he factors in with Tennessee. But for the most part, I really like what Tennessee has returning. Now, their defense wasn't as stout, being ranked in the 60s, but they are returning so many guys and have so much experience on that side of the ball. It's hard to think that they could get any worse on the defensive side of the ball. I think they will only improve and they will maintain a good offense. So I think this is a good year for Tennessee to actually get second place in the SEC East, and I like over 7.5.
I'm with you too. This one I also consider it as my favorite play. And like you said about the defense, if the defense just takes a reasonable or sizable step forward from last year, this team's going to hit 8 wins easily, in my opinion. So I'm in agreement there with Tennessee. Hendon Hooker was just so good. And another thing about Hendon Hooker, this isn't necessarily like Arkansas where behind KJ Jefferson, there's not a whole lot of depth. At least with Tennessee, they have Joe Milton behind Hendon Hooker. So Joe Milton, maybe not the greatest college quarterback, but if Hendon Hooker were to get injured, I don't think it would completely derail Tennessee's season because I think Milton would be a serviceable backup for Hooker. So that's another thing to factor in here when looking at this win total. So now with my final pick here, and this is actually a team that we disagreed on. My second favorite play is the Mississippi State over. Now I have a lot of good reasoning for this. Mississippi State last year, they went 7-6. They won 7 games in the regular season last year. They lost 3 games by 3 points or less. They lost 3 games by 3 points or less. And the reason why they lost those games, at least 2 out of 3 of those games, was because their special teams last year was god awful. Their kicking game was absolutely horrendous. And kicking is what cost them the Memphis game that they lost earlier in the season. And it also cost them the Arkansas game. I think Mississippi State fans would know what I'm talking about. So what did Mike Leach do? Mike Leach went out and got a kicker from Coastal Carolina, Massimo Biscardi, who was pretty good last year. He was one of the better G5 kickers. So I think they solved that kicking hurdle there. And if you look at this team, if they had a good kicker last year, they probably would have won at least 2 of those games. And you're looking at a team that could have won up to 9 games last year, and we'd be thinking of them a lot differently. So I think that this team is due for a little bit of better luck this year, especially with the kicking game settled. And that's not to mention last year they were top 35 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. So they were pretty solid on both sides of the ball, not one strength or weakness more so than the other. I think that 6 wins is the floor for Mississippi State. And if you look at the line there at 6.5, it just screams upside to me. I think they're very, very, very underrated. Nobody talks about them in the SEC West. I think that Mike Leach will continue his trend of improving as he moves on from program to program through the years. It's now his 3rd season. And as I mentioned earlier on the podcast or in the last video and the SEC West video, they do lose Charles Cross at offensive line, but they did go out and get the best JUCO offensive tackle in Percy Lewis. So we'll see where they shuffle him in there. I think that if the offensive line is a problem and they're shuffling around early in the season, that could spell trouble, especially for a team that passes a lot like they do. But if they get the offensive line fixed, I think this is a pretty safe lock for a team to win 7 games this year. Pretty underrated in my opinion. And that's why I like the over here for Mississippi State as my second favorite play.
Mississippi State certainly does have some talent. They have Will Rogers returning, who was a 4,700-yard passer, 36 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. That's a very good ratio by any estimation. That's a 4-to-1 ratio, which is more than ideal from your college quarterback, especially in a system that throws as much as Mike Leach does. So that's not too shabby. And then also what you said about the defense is definitely true. They're very experienced. All projected starters that are coming back are juniors, seniors, or graduate transfers. So they'll definitely be stout. They do play a rather competitive schedule. That's my biggest concern with them. And just because of that, I think they're going to end up losing a lot of close games. The 6.5 is something that I had under, but not in a confident under. But yeah, moving forward, that's just one that's going to be interesting to watch. Mississippi State's definitely one of those teams that can teeter on both sides of the spectrum, especially if things go their way. Like you were saying, like last year, they could have been a 9-win team if things just went their way. And this year is going to be interesting to see if those changes in special teams are going to make any difference moving forward. But with that being said, that's all the time that we have for you today. Thank you for tuning in. This is Xan Shoob signing out. We'll see you next time.